Talking of the mine fires, I'm looking at your background there, the Golden Gate, California, and the mine virus is going on in that state.
Mhm.
It's crazy. And people are like, oh, how does that connect to Bitcoin? I'm like, you just don't get it, do you?
No,
It all connects. Apple, headquarters, California. Warren Buffett just dumped half of his shares. That's part of the mine fires. You are caught
yep,
in a system that can literally reset you over the weekend in a moment's notice.
exactly. You know what's funny is wipe away all the stuff we're talking about and think about this on a first principle level, all right? Because you asked at the beginning, like, what is money? And that always seems to be like the permeating question. It's real
Yes.
simple. It's a simple answer. It is time, information, and energy. You put your time and energy into something, and you extract that for information of what you value. So if you go to the store and you buy cigarettes, you value cigarettes. And if you think about that on a first principle level, that is the most powerful vote that you could possibly think of. All right. Like, that's way more powerful than going to a ballot box, because that is sending an information signal out onto the world. You think that the cost of things are going to get cheaper in dollar terms? Like, that, it's not realistic. So yeah, all right, you're paying, and not to mention, like, if you're paying debt,
Yep.
this is funny to me too, because people are like, I have to pay my credit cards. I'm like, your debt is somebody else's liability, all right?
Yeah.
And like, everyone on this planet is not going to be able to pay their debt. So like, why waste your time paying it? Like, like, just take some of that money
Do
and
what you can.
transition it over to a new system. So
Yeah.
like, you're paying something that's going to go insolvent anyway. So like sometimes, like, my brain just, like, I scratch my head at that. I'm like, I know you feel obligated to pay this, but do you not understand that by you keep doing this, by you keep taking out these giant loans with these interest rates, all you're doing is empowering the system.
Mhm.
So it's kind of like this self-reinforcing mechanism, and then, like, people stay in their misery because they're stuck, and then they'll say, well, that's the only way we can do things. Well, it's not. Like, there's alternatives to this.
Yeah. Talking of the mine fires, I'm looking at your background there, the Golden Gate, California, and the mine virus is going on in that state.
Mhm.
It's crazy. And people are like, oh, how does that connect to Bitcoin? I'm like, you just don't get it, do you?
No,
It all connects. Apple, headquarters, California. Warren Buffett just dumped half of his shares. That's part of the mine fires. You are caught
yep,
in a system that can literally reset you over the weekend in a moment's notice.
exactly. You know what's funny is wipe away all the stuff we're talking about and think about this on a first principle level, all right? Because you asked at the beginning, like, what is money? And that always seems to be like the permeating question. It's real
Yes.
simple. It's a simple answer. It is time, information, and energy. You put your time and energy into something, and you extract that for information of what you value. So if you go to the store and you buy cigarettes, you value cigarettes. And
Yeah.
if you think about that on a first principle level, that is the most powerful vote that you could possibly think of. All right. Like, that's way more powerful than going to a ballot box, because that is sending an information signal out onto the world. Now, on the same breath, you have governments that are printing money exponentially. So if money is time and information, and someone is distorting it by printing, you're going to have a distortion in society because it's not reflecting real information. The information that gets spit out into society is completely distorted because there are people that are just cheating at the top. So
Yeah.
how exactly, when people talk about, oh, it's a free market, no, it's not.
But
It
I
like a
think that's
free
been proven
market.
over and over again by their own
Yeah,
actions.
exactly. all of our information would be expressed if the market was free.
Yeah.
And it's not. Like, so Bitcoin is like the ultimate expression of that exit. And eventually, like, people will just figure it out. You kind of get Bitcoin, you know, at the price you deserve, which is, it sounds horrible, but there's like a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. But I think even that is not bad, because I think whether you get Bitcoin at $2 million or if you get it at $1, the reality is that the functionality of it is still the same.
Yes.
It frees you from the same scam, right? And whatever your value is at that point in time, it will be better preserved at whatever price Bitcoin is, right? So that's why I look at it as, say Bitcoin could just be $1. It could be a stable coin as long as it functions in the same way that it
Mhm.
is. I think it is still providing the same value. And I think this is where, when we come to people who are just buying Bitcoin for the price movement, I think this is where there is a bit of a misalignment in their brain, right? Yes, I want to make profits from Bitcoin as well. But buying Bitcoin will never eliminate the proof of work element in life. Like you mentioned there, right?
Yeah.
Money is your time, information, and energy. When you put these things, when you direct these resources towards any one thing, right? The outcome of that is the value. You could look at directing your energy into that thing as the proof of work, right? So
Mhm.
let's say you decide that you're a trucker and you put your time and energy into moving people's goods from one place to another, right? That is your proof of work. When you get the value back, the most basic, the most fundamental thing that you want to happen is that the value that you have generated from spending your time and energy on something is for that value to be preserved. You don't want another party to come in from another area to be able to debase that value, right? That is where that theft comes in. I take myself, for example,
Mhm.
being able to buy a house. That's something that I was like, hey, I'd like to buy a house one day. But between the COVID situation and now, the same things that I was looking at purchasing are no longer the same price. So I would have
Yeah.
to work for even longer to be able to obtain the same thing. That is theft of my time, despite the
Mhm.
energy that I have put in. So if Bitcoin was just $1, it will function the same way as long as no one can. And that is where that sense of value has been manipulated, right? Because people don't look at the inflation. People look at borrowing money as part of life,
Yeah,
right?
debt.
Borrowing money to buy
Yep.
things that they are not, whether it's to go flex on their friends or whatever the case might be.
Yep.
And so they just
People have
borrow
unit
and
bias.
borrow.
People have
Was that?
unit bias too. People have unit bias.
Yes.
Like, I could give you like a great example.
Right.
So, uh, for years, I was involved in a basketball tournament where the prize was $1 million. All right.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like, I manage a team that would play in this. So the first year we did it, we actually made it to the championship. So this was 2015. So this year, I think like right after the championship game is on, it's on like Fox Sports right after we talk, and it's still $1 million. So of course, my Bitcoin brain said, I wonder what $1 million in 2015 is in today's purchasing power. So I looked this up.
Mm.
I looked this up, and it was $755,000. All right.
Okay, gone.
What?
So
Before
so
tax,
what
huh?
what they say is $1 million gets you $755,000 in
Worth of
2015 terms.
stuff. Yeah.
That's like 25% in like 10 years.
Yeah.
That, like, and so even if you want to play this game that the CPI numbers are right and the inflation numbers are right, even if they're right, even if it is 2% like they say, 2% compounding over time is insanity
Yep.
because it's an exponential growth. And we all
Yes.
know it's not, 2%. We know it's like much
It's not.
larger than,
Yep.
Yeah.
Getting groceries,
It's a whole lot more.
yeah, just go buy groceries, like, and you'll
Exactly.
see.
And I think it's important to be able to fix this problem first, because otherwise no matter how hard you work, it's like pouring water in a bucket with a hole.
Yep.
Right? Because no matter how hard you work, the value is always going to keep falling. So I think the beautiful thing about it is if we're able to get on that standard, that Bitcoin standard, and everyone understands the value of this Bitcoin, I think we'll see more creativity. I think we'll see more development. I think we'll see people more intense about creating value in society, right? So it cannot, and that's even if Bitcoin just was a stable coin, just sitting there as $1, as long as it cannot be devalued, right? Then this is not number go up type stuff. It will still be the most incredible form
Have
of
you
money.
guys went down the Fediment rabbit hole yet?
I started, but I haven't gone out of it.
So just to give you an idea of how Bitcoin will change the world. So obviously, we all know that everybody on this planet is not going to own base layer Bitcoin. You're going to probably need to own like layer 2s and layer 3s, you know.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So what Obi is doing at Fediment is unbelievable. Like, I cannot believe that this is a real thing. So they create federations and federated models. So if you're a lone farmer in Africa, you get involved with other lone farmers, all right? And it becomes a federation. Now, I may be butchering this, but I'm doing my best to understand it.
Yeah.
So
that's why I am trying to understand it as well.
Yeah.
The community aspects. Yeah.
So basically, instead of like purchasing as a lone operator, your purchases for the fertilizer and things happen in a federation. So when you buy in bulk, everything becomes cheaper. And everything is done where the federation is fully backed by Bitcoin, and it's done with a multi-sig scenario. So there's, you know, X amount of people that hold the keys. If they were to do something nefarious and take the Bitcoin, they lose social capital because now they've ruined their social capital in the federation. Whereas if Sam Bankman-Fried like screws all of us, he doesn't care. He's behind a computer screen. He doesn't know us personally. When you know someone personally, it's completely different. Not to mention, it's really hard to get that sort of consensus to steal. So the incentive is not there to steal. So where it gets interesting is when you think about this exponentially.
Yeah.
What if Obi's product not only turns into African farmers, it turns into, you know, maybe your cause is like a gay rights group, and you constantly have all these federations all over the world that are backed by Bitcoin, then your society is completely transformed because everything is run under decentralized federated models. And yet honesty, not to mention that you're bringing everyone a sense of community. Because now the importance is within the community that you believe in. Even though people are going to have different views, it doesn't matter. All those communities will exist regardless. So what that does is it completely disempowers the government because you're operating within these federated models, and everything's done through like eCash and the Lightning Network, which I highly recommend to understand like how that works. This is the silver bullet that Bitcoin needs, because it's going to push the adoption a lot faster. You know, I think Opie said that Lightning Network is the sword and Fediment is the shield of Bitcoin. And I love that he put it that way. So like I've been like going down the Fediment rabbit hole, and it's kind of like blown me away. And when you think big about it, you're like, wow, imagine like disempowered places, how Fediment would really affect society.
It's quite interesting that you brought that up, because that was going to be my next question is, let's apply this to BRICS. Let's apply this to South America. Let's apply this to Africa. Let's apply this to Asia, right? One of the things that the entire world did not see, that's to be one of the smartest marketing events, was having everybody on the dollar standard after World War II.
Yes.
Because of course, the biggest reset ever. The only nation standing at the point that supposedly won the war was America. So if you are under USD, any value that you ever create must come through them before it ever even exists as value.
Exactly. And then it deals with Triffin's dilemma as well. So this is why I always say game theory is important. So after World War II, you know, the world got together and said, we've destroyed ourselves now 2 world wars. We're going to have to globalize so all of our interests are aligned. So we don't have another world war because the weapons are getting too insane. It's not a gentleman's game of war like it was in the 1500s. You know, the mechanized weapons cause mass destruction. So as they get together and they create this system, America's advantage is that it's simply on the other side of the hemisphere. You know, like Europe was all interconnected and all destroyed in like one pocket.
By the
Like,
way, let's not call it Europe. You must well call it Asia because it's not an
yeah,
island that is standing by itself.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
Asia.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
they looked at it like America had the strongest economy. It was the least decimated by war. England was utterly destroyed by World War II, and it was the previous reserve currency.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was, I don't know if it was the late 50s or early 60s, you know, that I think Robert Triffin came up with the concept of, well, if we're backing everything by the dollar, which is supposedly backed by gold, and the United States has to bail out everyone with the dollar that gets in the currency problems, that creates what they call Triffin's dilemma, where there's this debt surplus that's going to mount up for the dollar, and eventually, like, we end up in the situation that we're in. So the dollar eventually has to depeg from gold, which it did in 71. And if you listen to Nixon's speech, he says the dollar's temporarily suspending gold reserve, gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when the government says temporarily, they mean permanently. So here we are, 2024, and like, are we still in temporary? That's almost as ridiculous to me as the concept of a soft landing. How can there be a soft landing when the plane has been crashing for 90 years?
Yeah.
Like when the landing happens, it's over. Like your goal is to keep it in the air. So
That is
if
why
you
they
think
created
about,
QE.
yeah, just
Yeah.
keep QEing it and everything will be fine. So
Honestly,
it
QE
totally
is
makes sense.
I was just gonna say QE is like the plane is falling to the ground and somehow you shift the earth down so you can keep falling
Yes.
further. Yeah,
Yes.
they carry on.
I think QE is even crazier because if you want to use the plane analogy, every time you're about to hit the ground,
Yeah.
you go higher than you were before.
Yeah.
So when the crash happens, it happens from a higher point each time.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is the most absurd thing ever. It makes no sense.
Yes.
It makes no sense whatsoever. Yet this is the reality we live in. So
Yeah.
shocking.
So it totally makes sense. Like, again, if you think about the game theory, is the dollar's being debased, and all of that inflation, as bad as it is here in the United States, is worse everywhere else because they export all that inflation.
Yeah.
You know, if you think about a cobalt miner, you know, in Africa, who's like basically dying for like 20 cents a day so we can have Teslas here, that's what it looks like. So as that gets exposed out there, the game theory is everyone will get fed up with it. And then this is why you have BRICS. BRICS is like, we don't want to do this. Like, we're going to try and unite and go back to a gold standard. But there's a fundamental problem with that idea too. Because at the end of the day, no one in their right mind is going to trust BRICS and the amount of gold reserves that they say. Like, most of those countries are not trustworthy. Not that the United States is, but you know, relatively,
It's the same.
yeah,
They're still humans.
Exactly. And China doesn't want to be the global reserve currency because of Triffin's dilemma. They'll just end up
They've
back
learned their
in,
lesson. They've seen what happened to America, so they won't do the same thing. They're too smart for that.
Exactly. Why would you want to be in that position? So like all these people are like, well, China's taking over. I'm like, no, everyone's tied together. Like if the United States fails, China's failed because who's buying all of their products? And if
America.
China fails, the United States fails. You know, like everything is all tied together. So the goal is to become your own independent sovereign. So if you can't do that with fiat, you can't do that with the dollar, you can't do that with gold. The game theory says there's only one move here, you know, like,
Bitcoin.
and that's for people to adopt a Bitcoin standard. Like, so it's kind of like if you play tic-tac-toe and I drew an X and then another X, you have to draw an O above me to block me. You can't draw an O over here. Like
Yeah.
Create
you're
another
forced,
lane.
yeah,
You can create
you're
another
forced
lane.
to make that move.
Not like
Yeah.
fiat.
Absolutely. So, well, let me ask you this then, forward looking, because this is one of the areas where I think for me personally, I'm trying to spend more of my time in furthering the Bitcoin adoption, and that is just getting people to use it. And I think for me, maybe I I I envision a period in time or a point in time where we have communities understanding the value of Bitcoin, exchanging value with each other with Bitcoin. It's no different from cash, how I see it. If I were to buy a car from you and you said the car was, I've actually done this in the past before, so I'm into cars. And there was a point in time back in the day, and I helped my friend and I, he had a Subaru STI, right? And he would drive it for maybe like a month. And I remember at one point he was like, "Hey, I'll trade you this STI. You give me the Turbo Civic." Right. And we're like, okay, fair enough. I see it's about the same money put into that car for this one. And we'll make that swap. There was no money involved, right? He took the Civic. Eventually he traded it for another guy who had a Evo. And this is value being exchanged without touching the dollar.
Yep.
And I think in the same way, communities can exchange value for Bitcoin as long as we agree that this is what it is, right? And that's something that I am hoping to kind of push further, right? Especially with relocating myself from the US. How do you envision the future of that adoption on a local level where people start interacting with it more?
So I have a nuanced view of this subject because everyone's always like spend your Bitcoin and create a circular economy.
Yeah.
And I understand the ethos of that, and I do think we're going to end up there. But I have a different viewpoint.
Mhm.
So first, money can't be money exchanged until it hardens first. So like
Okay.
you can't fly before you walk. And
Right.
gold went through the same thing. Now, let's just say Bitcoin hardens.
Mhm.
Part of the hardening process and part of the adoption that you're seeking that will happen is not going to happen at the current state of the building of Bitcoin.
Right.
It's going to happen with ease of access. And the internet operated the same way. And the internet existed in the 80s, and then HTTP came out in like the early 90s. But the ease of access really didn't permeate for like another 10 years because of the protocols built on top of it. So now, like, here, me and you are using Zoom. We're not interacting with the base layer of the internet. All right.
Right.
I think Bitcoin is going to be the same way. If you're thinking everyone's going to be interacting on the base layer or even Lightning, I think you're mistaken if you think the adoption is going to happen that way. It's all the things that are going to be built on top of it. It's all the things like Nostr, where we're exchanging zaps and things like that. That's the best way that you're going to globally onboard 8 billion people. It's not going to be like the current build and then all of us just tell people to use Bitcoin. And I think that's the mistake a lot of us make, is we're not seeing the exponential protocols that'll be built on top of this. We're not seeing, like YouTube. Using YouTube was something we didn't even envision in like 1990. So I think Bitcoin operates the same way, and that's why this is a slow, gradual process, because you're also unwinding the network effect of the dollar, which has a huge power hold on the system. Like, you're not just going to destroy that overnight. So it has to be like a slow transition, and you need the protocols to be built.
That was a question I had actually after Robin Royer's interview with Michael Saylor.
Mhm.
I was asking that question in my mind was that doesn't that make Bitcoin more centralized? Because I was talking about how in the future it almost be, enabling the banks to do what the banks do now, but on the Bitcoin standard, the applications that you can build on Bitcoin. But it goes back to the human effect, which is greed, and people just abusing that layer to accomplish their own profitability.
So you're saying that if they can't capture it on layer one, they'll capture it on the protocols above it.
I mean, some
Just
banks
so I
did that.
understand the question.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Banks would do that.
So-
Banks would do that.
Well, I don't think it can be captured.
I mean,
Yeah, obviously, yeah, you can't
Period.
capture it. But so to give you an example of why that's going to be extremely difficult, I'll go back to Fediman, because Bitcoin on layer one, your transactions are not private. There's this like illusion that like your transactions are private on layer one. But on Lightning and the layers above it, the transactions are private. So because you're expanding the privacy and you're expanding all of these things on the next layers. And everything has to be done at the settlement layer of Bitcoin on the layers above it. And as the settlement layer stays decentralized and secure, everything above it is going to add features to that decentralization and security. It would be utterly impossible for them to capture it, because if the world's on a Bitcoin standard, they can't rent seek off of us. They would actually have to trade their Bitcoin to get the things that they want. So if they want yachts and all the way that they live, they can't like they can't create more Bitcoin, and they can't rent seek. So they
they're
actually
doing
have
it
to
now.
create, yeah,
They're doing it now with the
actually have to create
ETFs,
value.
but they're doing it now with the ETFs. I mean, it's not on the Bitcoin layer, but with with an instrument like the ETF,
But that's not
they could
Bitcoin.
do that.
I would say that's not Bitcoin. That is just more of a representation, which is in the fiat system completely.
Yes. So
Right.
so with the ETFs, okay, it's cash in and cash out. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Coinbase custodies it. I get it. But someone is going to play loan games with those
Mhm.
at some point.
Right.
And people are going to learn the hard way, as the system gets exposed. But bear this in mind for a second. It's not like it's really BlackRock's customers that are buying it. It's not like, we act like, oh, BlackRock's buying it. Like there's a representation of people buying it.
Mhm.
So imagine for a second, because we're in this transition where we're not in a Bitcoin world and we're in the in-between phase. So we're going to bring all the fiat garbage to Bitcoin. And that's going to scare a lot of people because we're in a transition phase. So if Bitcoin permeates into the ETFs, and Fidelity has a ton and BlackRock has a ton now, and they become part of people's pension portfolios and 401ks and all this other stuff that we talked about.
Mhm.
And then the currency at the same time is going through what it's going through. What do you think a Bitcoin crash would do? Because it's a Trojan horse at that point. Now, the government, who had to bail out the banks, has to bail Bitcoin out by buying more Bitcoin. So all you're essentially doing is all roads lead to the same path. And you're going to get, situations where Bitcoin gets like massively dumped on the market. And we're all going to have to deal with that. Like, that's just reality. But when it gets dumped, and someone dumps like 10,000 Bitcoin, one person has 10,000 Bitcoin. Now that Bitcoin spreads, and 10,000 other people buy that Bitcoin. So all you've done is expanded the adoption. So it's really hard to capture it, because at some point you have to spend the Bitcoin. Like you're not you know, I understand that within the fiat world that they're going to make their fees off of this, and this is going to exist for, you know, 20, 30 years. Like, I get that. But eventually, like, that system will be antiquated, and we'll move on to the new system. You know, why would you pay BlackRock 2% to hold your money if you could just self-custody it? Like,
It's
you know,
2% plus another 20% for the increase in price.
exactly.
Yeah.
So like you think people are stupid? They're going to catch on to that. They're only doing it now because that's the way we do things. We do things through brokerage accounts. That's the norm. What happens when that's not the norm? You know, like, I told someone, I worked in finance for a while. I told them, I said, a financial advisor is useless. And I just remember how much flack I got for this too. I said, well, you're useless. All you're doing is just telling people to buy the S&P, and then they never call you. And then you're just taking like 1-2% management fees. They could just go to Vanguard right now and buy an S&P index and do the exact same thing and not pay you management fees. You're just a guy in a suit and tie. So that reality is going to kick in for BlackRock and all these other companies too. So
I'm surprised it still exists, actually.
yeah,
we used to pay $20 to be able to trade back in the day on a TD Ameritrade.
Yeah.
Yep. It's the same thing. Like everyone talks about like the Visa argument. Like, you know, eventually we're not going to pay Visa the 2% fees when we can use the Lightning Network. Well, the same logic is going to happen with the ETFs. Eventually, people will just smarten up and just hold their Bitcoin in self-custody. And again, the protocols will get easier, and self-custody will be easier and easier and easier. You know, like multi-sig is now like a thing, and it wasn't a thing like a decade ago. So as the ease of access gets easier, like the ETFs will just be antiquated.